I'm going to tell you a story about a honeymoon. But first, let me tell you a little about the couple in question. The man and woman met in a bookshop. The man was smart and witty, and the woman was easily the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes on. She had noticed him pretending to read the jacket of a book while stealing quick glances at her long dark hair and clear grey eyes. She finally sidled over to him and quietly suggested that he buy her a cup of coffee at the Café Amour. While the two were waiting for their drinks, they both realized that they had found the one. When the coffee arrived, the woman exclaimed, "Oh, darling, I love you." "Come again?" the man said, dribbling coffee onto his shirt. "Your mug," the woman said. "It says, 'Oh, darling, I love you.'" "Oh, so it does," the man said. And then he said, "I will love you forever. That's what your mug says." She leaned forward and whispered, "Oh, darling, I love you." "I will love you forever," he replied. And that was it, the makings of a wonderful, somewhat cheesy romance. After a time of absolute bliss together, the man asked the woman to marry him. She happily accepted. When he asked where she wanted to go on honeymoon, she said without any hesitation, "The Faroe Islands." "The what?" "Faroe Islands. It's a tiny cluster of islands between Iceland and Norway." "Oh," the man said, "wouldn't you prefer something a little more warm and beachy? The Bahamas, perhaps?" But her mind was made up, and so, after the two were married, they set off to their unusual honeymoon destination. They arrived to a bleak, semi-frozen landscape. It was February, and very, very cold. When they had settled into their cabin on the edge of the ocean, the woman gazed out the window. "Isn't it the most magical place you've ever seen?" she asked. Her husband was shivering in a chair by the fire, dreaming of a Caribbean beach and a pina colada. But when he saw his wife's delight, he couldn't help but smile, and said it was, indeed, the most magical place he had ever seen. "Oh, darling, I love you," she said. "I will love you forever," he replied. He smiled again. Ever since the day they first met, they had expressed their love for each other with the same phrase each and every time. He loved their little tradition. That evening, the couple dressed in furs and boots in preparation for a guided tour of Tyndall, a tiny rugged island with 5 peaks. The island was shaped like a hand. The locals called it the Witch's Hand. Their cabin overlooked the Witch's Hand. It was just a short boat ride away. The couple met their guide and a few other tourists on the shore outside their cabin. Together they boarded a night ferry. When they arrived on the Witch's Hand, the guide asked the group to huddle round. He told them that the island was not for human inhabitation. It was the place to where the fairy folk had been banished. "Sailors claim that they have seen trolls and sprites here on the Witch's Hand," the guide said. "There are also rumors that shapeshifters live here, but no one can prove it, for shapeshifters are the masters of disguise. They can imitate anything." "Are the fairy folk dangerous?" one of the tourists wanted to know. "They certainly can be," the guide said. "They are obsessed with humans, but don't you worry about them. They have no boats, and they cannot swim. The water is deadly cold. No one can survive longer than 15 seconds in those temperatures." As the group toured around the island, pillars of green snaked through the sky. "The aurora!" the woman exclaimed to her husband. She lowered her hood and stared at the sky's majestic display. The guide gaped at her. He hurried and pushed her hood back onto her head. He then took her husband aside and said, "You and your wife should take the ferry back to the main island immediately." "Why?" the man asked. "Because your wife is too beautiful for her own good." "And this is a problem?" "Absolutely." Someone or something might want her. The man chuckled. You don't honestly believe in that hocus-pocus nonsense, do you? The guide looked at him severely. You have been warned. Then, all of a sudden, the northern lights seemingly turned out, and a mist descended. No one could see nor hear one another, and the group stumbled about in confusion. When the mist finally lifted, the man was gone. The woman's heart started to pound. She shouted out for him. Where was he? She dashed down the hill and saw him standing next to the ferry. She heaved a huge sigh of relief and hurried toward him. What are you doing down here? I just want to get away from this place, the man replied. When the rest of the group approached, they took the ferry back to the main island, and the couple returned to their cabin. The next morning, when the woman woke up, she wrapped herself up in a blanket and stepped outside. The morning air was freezing, but the view was glorious. She glanced over at the witch's hand and saw something moving on the island. It was difficult to make out, but it looked like a man. Was he waving at her? The next moment, her husband appeared at her side. Look, she said, there's something on the witch's hand. I don't see anything. Look. But when she looked back, the thing she saw was gone. However, she saw the figure on the island twice more that day. Once when she was out whale watching, and again when she was walking along the coastal path. On both occasions, the figure was waving at her wildly. Why did no one else see it? The next day, the woman refused to go anywhere. She sat in front of her cabin, scouring the witch's hand with a pair of binoculars. Her husband told her it was crazy and reminded her that no one lived on the island, but she was determined to get a good look at what had tried to get her attention the day before. After a whole day of watching and seeing nothing, the woman laughed at herself, apologized to her husband, and promised to enjoy the rest of their honeymoon together. On their second last day in the Faroe Islands, the couple rented 2 rowboats, and side by side they rowed out onto the ocean together. While they were taking in the view, the woman saw something running on the witch's hand. Her heart stopped. She quickly grabbed for her binoculars and searched the little island. Nothing found him. It was definitely a man. He was dressed in furs and boots, but she couldn't see his face. His hood was pulled down too far. He then reached a hand toward her and beckoned her. Do you see something? Her husband asked. No, nothing, the woman replied. When they got back to the shore, the woman asked her husband if they could keep their boats for another day. She said she wanted to go out on the water one more time the next morning. That night, after the couple went to bed, the woman waited until her husband started snoring before slipping out of the covers and quietly getting dressed. She snuck out the cabin, crept to the shore, got into her boat, and rowed toward the witch's hand. Moments later, the man sat up with a start when he realized the woman was no longer in bed. The penny dropped. He hurried and dressed, grabbed a lantern, and took off to his boat. He rowed as fast as he could and reached the witch's hand just as the woman was pulling her boat out of the water. This is madness, he called to her. She jumped. She had not noticed her husband following her. She felt embarrassed and explained, I saw the thing on the island again today. I think he needs my help. Listen, the man said. Let's tell the authorities about this tomorrow. But for now, you need to come back to the cabin. You're going to die of cold. Come, I'll take you back with me. It was true. The woman was freezing. Her body was going numb. She nodded and climbed back into her husband's boat with him, and leaving her boat on the shore of the witch's hand. When they were halfway back to the main island, the man suddenly stopped rowing. What is it? The woman asked. Shh. Then they both heard it. Another set of oars cutting through the water nearby. The man raised his lantern in front of him, and smack! The woman screamed as the person in the other boat struck her husband with an oar and launched himself into their boat. She threw herself at him and yanked at his hood. It was her husband. The two men were identical. Everything about them was the same, even their clothing. "What is going on?" she shrieked. The man who had just attacked her husband said, "This man is not your husband. He is an imitator who left the island with you after your tour." "Nonsense!" the other man exclaimed. They started to wrestle. Now the woman really did not know which was which. The two men stood up, swinging fists. The boat started to rock and splash. Both men fell into the icy water. They surfaced and gripped the edge of the boat. The woman remembered what the guide had said. She had 15 seconds at best to save her husband. But which of these two men was the real thing? The men were turning blue. They couldn't climb into the boat without her assistance. Who to save? Who to save? "I'm going to have to quiz you," the woman said. "When is my birthday?" The man on her left shouted the answer. It was right. She went to help him, but the other said, "Wait! I knew that. I just didn't get a chance to speak. What is my mother's maiden name?" Both men stared blankly back at her. Bad question. Where was I born? One man said, "No one knows." It was correct. She grabbed him and hauled him over the edge of the boat, just as the other man lost his grip and slipped below the surface of the water. She clung to the man she had just saved. "Oh, darling, I love you," she said. He gripped her tightly, very tightly, and said, "I love you too."